Thank you very much. Thank you for being here today. First, a question. Quick show of hands. How many of you have been to the 6th Floor Museum prior to your visit today? Okay. Well, we're glad you could be here today. We do a lot of programs at this museum, a lot of public programs, a lot of educational programs, but this is the kind of format that I really like best because it gives us a chance to interact directly with our audience. And in a few minutes, we're going to be asking folks to share their stories of where they were when they heard the news of President Kennedy's death. So that goes for our rememberers in the audience who were alive in 1963, but it doesn't let our younger folks off the hook. I want you guys to be thinking about what President Kennedy means to you and maybe ways in which Kennedy's words have impacted your life or your education in some way. So be thinking about that as we go through today's program, and we'll have a chance for our audience to share some of these stories with us today right here at this microphone at the front. As Sharon mentioned, one of my responsibilities here at the museum is managing our ongoing oral history project. And that actually started when this institution opened in 1989. It began with folks who were very moved by the exhibit on the 6th floor, and they wanted to share their personal stories of where they were when they heard the news. And so using some tape recorders in the early days, we recorded a handful of first-hand recollections, oral history interviews, and that has evolved into a videotaped project now recording in high definition that has captured over 900 personal stories relating to the life, death, and legacy of President Kennedy and the history and culture of Dallas and the 1960s. And this program today is being recorded as part of the Oral History Project, so we hope that some of you will participate and share your own stories. You may have noticed when you walked in today there's a book at the back of the room, and that is actually a sign-up book if you would like to do your own oral history interview. It doesn't matter if you live locally or if you're from out of town. We do them here at the museum on video, but we also do quite a number over the phone. So if you'd like to share your own personal story with us for the archives, please sign up at in the book back there. Just leave your name and your contact information, and we will be in touch with you shortly to participate in this project. On the screen here, I'm going to flash a list of the thematic categories of the oral histories to give you a sense of scope of this collection. As you can tell, we've talked to people of all ages from all over the world who have stories to share about the day of the Kennedy assassination. And as we get further and further away from that historic event, it becomes really important that we capture these stories before they're lost forever. 2013 marks the 50th anniversary of this event. And if you want to learn more about our oral history project, I'd encourage you to go to our website, jfk.org, and you can actually access an alphabetical list of every person who's participated in an oral history. And through our new e-museum interface, you can actually watch video clips and audio clips from some of our oral histories, and we'll be adding to that throughout the year. So please check back at our website, jfk.org, frequently. I want to begin to try to get everyone's mind going by showing you just a brief clip from one interview, one of the 900 plus interviews in our oral history project. And we're going to hear from a young man, Eddie Jemerson, who actually volunteered for the project earlier this year. And so we'll listen to his memories of the assassination, and then I'll turn it over to Gary to talk a little bit about the museum's collections.
Starting on that day, I started collecting newspapers. I had my sister in Fort Worth collect papers from me, in Dallas to collect papers. And I had, I started in the archives with papers during that time. It was interesting because I love reading comic books and things, newspapers. Everything I got my hand on was a reader. And I just started collecting the newspapers concerning the assassination in '63. It started not only there was the talk of our little town at that time. It was just amazing. Something happened in our lifetime during this period. It was very tragic, and it touched everyone's heart at that time.
How did your classmates and your teacher react to the news?
Everybody was stunned. It was something, it happened, but you couldn't believe it happened here in Texas and Dallas at that time. It was just, everybody was stunned at the event. In '63, I know at our church, it was just amazing the effect that it had on the people in our neighborhood at that time.
Interesting story about the early days of the museum. As one of many consultants back in the late 1980s, I was here for many of the meetings and working on content issues and that. And we did some interviews with some of the eyewitnesses, primarily just to gather the correct information. That's how the oral history program started. And little by little we realized, you know, we're losing people every day. And the decision was made to make permanent recordings, and the initial ones were done just on audio cassettes. But except for the first 10 or 12, all the succeeding interviews, over 900 now, have all been done on video, and recently they've been done on high definition. In the early days, we were just called the sixth floor exhibit. We were never mentioned, we were never planned to be a collecting institution. We were never planned to be a museum, even. People would come by, and they, as Stephen said, they were so moved by the exhibit that they said, look, I've got this stuff, I've got these pictures, I've got these magazines, I've got these books, and I want them to be kept somewhere safe and secure. And they would drop these things off, and that's literally how our collection began. In 1993, the decision was made to expand the sixth floor exhibit, and that's when we basically became the sixth floor museum. And we had a formal collection policy, and I was hired as the archivist, and that's when the collection really started to grow. And we get calls on a regular basis, people, even if it's just the local Dallas newspapers, of which we don't need any more of the ones from that weekend. People have important things, and they realize they need to be kept and saved and made available. And you can access our collection online and in our reading room down on the first floor of the old book depository building. We got a call last May from Sarah Lucero, who is a news anchor and reporter at KENS-TV, Channel 5 in San Antonio, the CBS station, and a local resident there named Roy Boteo came to their attention. He had a home movie that he shot of the Kennedys the night before the assassination. This was in Houston at the LULAC reception, the League of United Latin American Citizens. Roy was the chairman of the scholarship committee, and he'd had his film, this is it, he had his film transferred to video there in San Antonio, and the San Antonio station showed it. But before showing it, they asked for someone with some knowledge of this material to take a look at it, and I got to see it up here via satellite, and I was just amazed, because this event is pretty much forgotten today. This was the night before the assassination, and because he was a high official with LULAC, Roy was able to get up close, and you really feel like you're there in the moment, being jostled back and forth. And of course, Roy is an amateur; he doesn't have the camera perfectly and focused all the time. But you know, it really helps you feel like you were there. And Jackie Kennedy stunned everybody when she came out to address the crowd. She spoke to them briefly in Spanish. And no one knew that was coming, and it just wowed and thrilled everybody. After this reception, there was a dinner for Texas Congressman Albert Thomas that the Kennedys attended. Then they flew to Fort Worth, arriving about 11 o'clock. They got to Hotel Texas around midnight, and President Kennedy spoke at a breakfast the next morning, and he made a second speech at a parking lot outside. And then the trip to Dallas happened. So that puts it in perspective. Roy Boteo was most concerned that his film be preserved somewhere. And he had contacted the National Archives in Washington. He contacted the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library in Boston, and both institutions expressed interest. I called him after learning about this film and explained to Roy that this was a Texas event, and his film needed to stay in Texas. He liked that, and that's how we got it.
It's a really poignant film, and when you look at this, recognizing that less than 24 hours later the president's dead, it makes this a particularly meaningful film, especially to have here at the Sixth Floor Museum.
Yeah.
Roy lives in San Antonio now. He's now retired, and I went down to San Antonio earlier this year and did an oral history with him, so we have that in the collection as well. Roy telling his personal experiences with LULAC and what President Kennedy meant to him at that time. And then as part of the oral history, we actually ran the film, and Roy provided us with some narration. So that's wonderful to have in the collection so that we can share this with future generations of students and researchers who are interested in President Kennedy's activities in Texas.
Home movies in those days didn't have a soundtrack, unfortunately. They were silent films, And at the end of the reel, you had to take the reel out of the camera, turn it over, put it back in. You filmed on one side of the film and then up the other side. So that's why it gets all yellow there, because there's some light got to the film at that point. We use a special lab near Boston to do these film-to-video transfers, and the results are often amazing. You can get good quality from taking your films to Walgreens or CVS, something like that. But, we need to do better than that. It's an obligation, obviously, and we certainly work hard to live up to that.
We'd like to take a moment now to invite a couple of you from the audience who would like to share your own stories of where you were on November 22nd, 1963. Since we are recording this, we'll ask you to please step up to the mic here so everyone can see you and hear you.
Don't be nervous. It's
yeah,
okay.
Please don't be
It's
shy.
okay.
Everyone who was alive that day certainly has a story to share.
Don't everybody rush up at once now.
Yeah, please come right on up if you would.
Here comes someone.
Yes, ma'am. Just please identify yourself and tell us your story. Yeah.
Yeah, turn it around so we can,
Yeah,
so the camera
absolutely.
can see you also.
Yes.
There we go.
My name's Edna Winnett. Is it on?
It should
Should
be
be.
on, yeah. Might speak directly into it. Hold it close.
My name's Edna Winnett, and I recall when this happened. It still moves me very much. I was in the 4th grade in my hometown of Eagle Pass, Texas, and we were in the playground, and the teachers brought us in. We didn't understand what had happened. And I remember this boy, Dexter Macbeth, told me. He always liked to be the one first to tell the news, and it's funny because his family's in the newspaper business, still back home. And he rushed out and just told us, the president's dead. They've killed the president. And all the teachers were crying. We walked into the school. We didn't know what we were doing. The teachers couldn't talk. They were come emotion. And then somebody starts off scaring us that the Cubans are going to attack us and the Russians are going to take over. And it was like 9/11. And you don't know what's happening. But there was tremendous sorrow, and we were let out early, not fully understanding. But at that time, you mentioned LULAC and you mentioned the Botellos, and I do know them personally. LULAC was an organization that stands for the League of United Latin American Citizens. And at that time, minorities, during the president's time, we were very disenfranchised. And when Kennedy was elected, there was a hope. Our parents felt hope that finally Hispanics, minorities were going to get an opportunity to get into better jobs, into better schools. And as 4th grade, you really can't understand it, but your parents are excited. And we get home, and our parents were crying. And at that time, the homes, being a Catholic, you would have the picture of the Pope and of John F. Kennedy. It's very common. And so to see this icon being shot, it's very, very scary, very sad. And then what followed with his brother, and then Martin Luther King. It was a very, very scary time, very scary time. But we are here. And young people, we will continue. We will continue because we have the spirit, we have the strength, and you are the light, and you got to continue. When things seem dark right now, you are the light that will continue. Remember, and thank you for keeping this alive. Thank you very, very much. It still hurts, it still remembers, but it was a very, very important time, and I hope you are doing a wonderful job. This cannot be forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you
Appreciate
very
it.
much.
We can hear the parade right outside, the Veterans Day Parade. So, and there's also going to be, if not already, a flyover. So be prepared for that as well. Would anyone else like to share a story while we're at this point of the program? Any other rememberers out there want to share where they were on November 22nd? There'll be other opportunities later, so
Sure.
we can.
Yep.
Okay. Oh, yes, ma'am.
I was a teenager when it happened, and my family were Republicans. So John Kennedy was not a hero in our house. However, what I remember about it is that we stayed in front of the TV for the first time. It was the first time we had real television coverage of an event like we take for granted now. And it was the first time you had 24-hour-a-day lived black and white coverage of what was going on. And it was so sad to see Walter Cronkite cry, because he was the newsman of the era, and Huntley and Brinkley, who meant so much to us. But one thing I do remember, that summer I went to New York City, and I remember 3 or 4 times we would try to hail a cab. That's the way you get around up there. And they would not take us in their cab because we had Texas accents. And that was the first time I felt, my goodness, why would you do this? And I felt so ashamed of our state, and I still do. I think it's so very sad that it happened here, but I want to commend you all for coming down, because it's a wonderful slice of history, and you should come frequently, especially at the anniversary. And you might tell us what's planned then for the schedule.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The pictures we've been looking at are from the President's arrival at Love Field on November 22nd. And there was a young man there who had a movie camera and an interesting story. Why don't you tell us about that?
That would be Ward Warren. By the way, Ward served in the Army, so we would certainly want to thank him if he were here today for his service to the country. Ward was 15 years old, a student at Thomas Jefferson High School, and he was the family home movie photographer. And of course, you had to get permission from your parents if you wanted to get out of school to go see the President's motorcade, and that's what he did. And he was so excited that he went out to Love Field, which was the major airport at the time, no DFW airport in those days. He went out very, very early, and you can see some of the footage he shot then. You can see it's very cloudy and overcast. There was rain overnight, not a whole lot, but it was just drizzling, and you can see the puddles there. And the rain actually stopped about an hour or so before the Kennedys arrived. Had the rain continued, the Secret Service would have put that plastic bubble top on the car. The bubble top was not bulletproof, although most people don't know that. And it makes you wonder what might have happened had the assassin seen the bubble top on there, thinking perhaps he would not be able to accomplish his deed. Ward got a few scenes showing some of the dignitaries arriving, Mayor Earl Cabell and some others. And then he caught Air Force Two coming in. Vice President Johnson would fly in ahead of time on Air Force Two. That was standard procedure, and he would be waiting at the bottom of the ramp to greet President Kennedy when he arrived on Air Force One. And very much like Roy Botteo, Ward got caught up in the excitement, and of course he's standing with other people behind a rope fence, and they're getting jostled around, so the picture is a little shaky and all. There was live television coverage. All the local TV stations showed it live, but only in black and white. And you get a very different perspective on the events here as the Kennedys arrived, because when you're standing down there on the ground with people, that's very different than looking at it from a camera mounted high atop a TV remote truck. So Ward called one day. Usually these calls come in to me, and he said, I've got this home movie, and it's not very good, but I had it transferred to video, and I don't know what to do with this. Well, donate it to the 6th floor museum is usually the first thing I recommend to people. And so we chatted about it, and it was very clear very early on that Ward was more than happy to donate his film to the museum, not only to be transferred to video properly, but for preservation. We keep our films in cold storage at a local facility, and the film will exist as film for decades to come. And some of these films are going to actually be remastered soon, digitally, and in high definition. So as technology progresses, we upgrade our collection and our preservation efforts accordingly.
We did an oral history with Ward Warren as well, and so that is also part of our collection here at the museum. I want to turn back to the oral history collection for a moment and play another clip for you from one of our 900 plus interviews in the collection. And this is a young lady who actually volunteered for an oral history the last time we had one of these Where Were You programs. It was in November of 2008, and Diane Cody, a local resident, was in the audience, and afterwards she signed the book, the same book that's back there on the table today, and then we arranged for her to come to the museum to do a videotaped interview. Diane's story is particularly poignant because November 22nd, 1963 was her 12th birthday, and so we're going to hear from her and what that experience was like.
This was my 12th birthday, and you know, I'm sure we had a routine morning and had lunch, and it was afternoon, early afternoon, and there was a speaker system of some sort. It was not used. The principal came into the room, Sister Bernadine, and she told us what had happened. And then she asked that we bow our heads and say a prayer. And we did. There is that stunned silence of disbelief, like you don't know how to act and you're not sure what you heard. But we all knew who the president was. This was a Catholic president. This president had his picture in schools, right there with Jesus and Mary and everyone else, you know. So this was really heartfelt. And I honestly can't tell you how I got home. I can't tell you if school was dismissed. I know that. It was dismissed early. And there were certainly, there was one of my girlfriends whose mother was, both her parents were doctors, and they drove. They might have taken me home. I might have ridden the bus. I might have walked. I really don't remember. And I have a friend who told me that when you can't remember that, those kind of things, a lot of times there's a trauma. You know, so I'm going to say that, like probably the rest of the world, I had some element of shock. That birthday to me is just black and white. Birthdays are not black and white. Birthdays, even in a small, you know, lower income household, usually have color. They usually have balloons or certainly a cake, and I'm sure I had one. My mother would not have failed to bake me a cake. I didn't have store-bought cakes. We always want them when we don't have them, but I'm sure I had a homemade cake. And I'm sure we ate dinner, but I don't remember any of it. I just remember the black and white. The whole thing replaced for black and white for me, and the TV being on.
Why don't you tell us where you were?
I was actually in the cafeteria, and it's, you know, all these years later, it's remarkable to me how much of that I can remember. I remember the assistant principal walking in, and he stood right next to our table, and you know, we're all making noise, you know, we're kids, and he stood there and waited for everybody to calm, to get quiet, and his lower lip was trembling. It was so strange. And then he spoke, and he said that we've just gotten word that President Kennedy has been shot in Dallas. We don't know any more than that. It's probably nothing serious, but go ahead and go to your next class, and we'll keep you advised on the PA system. And my next class was a history class. Now this is up in Denver, and one of the major stations here at the time was K-Box, a top 40 station, and somehow their signal was picked up by phone lines so that the big top 40 rock station in Denver started airing K-Box live coverage. And we're listening to this, and we're hearing these reports from Parkland Hospital and all this detailed information coming out very, very early. And all of a sudden, our history teacher turned it off. And she said, this can't be serious. I mean, and we have studies to do, and I think we had a test that day or something. So she turned it off. So we didn't know until like the next period, and the buzz in the hallway. And like the oral history person there, I remember we got let out early. I have no clue how I got home. I think I walked. And my images are black and white, because TV was mostly black and white in those days. And my parents were Republicans, and they would never have voted for John F. Kennedy under any circumstances. but we were all unified in a unique way. And I remember my dad, who served in World War II. He was a pilot. He was convinced World War III was about to begin, and the Russians had started it, and the missiles would come over the horizon and strike the U.S. And a few years ago, former Soviet Premier Gorbachev came to visit the museum, and we walked him around. Turns out he's been fascinated by the assassination subject for years and years. And he told us, he said, Gary, that was my first year in the KGB, and we knew that our people were not involved, but we were convinced that you Americans would not believe that, and that you were going to fire your missiles at us. And that would have started World War III. And it was just amazing to me to hear this story, even today when I think about it, because here are two major superpowers, the Russians and the Americans, barely able to talk to themselves, to negotiate it, and figure out a way to get along. And we're both scared to death that the other guy was going to fire missiles at us. That's how scary it was.
Would anyone else from the audience like to share their story with us at this time, where you were on the day of the assassination?
Can I ask you a question instead of sharing the story?
Sure.
Can you remind us of the exact time of the shooting and what day of the week? No, just wait a second.
12:30 p.m. Friday.
On Friday.
12:30.
November 22nd.
Friday or Thursday?
Friday. Yeah. Lee Harvey Oswald was shot 47 hours later, 11:21 Sunday morning. And it was live on NBC. Yeah.
Now that you know that, would you like to share your story with us?
I will share.
Please.
It's not poignant. It's not.
Everybody has a story to share.
Hi, I'm Kathy Brooks, and I grew up in Dallas. I've been here all my life. And I was a freshman in high school, and I remember, and the reason why I asked is because you said you were in lunch, and I was in lunch, and several friends had gone to the parade. Their parents had taken them out of school. And I just remember we were in class, and this is before cell phones and instant knowledge of anything. And so somebody must have I must have had a late lunch class, a lunch period, because somebody came back to school and said, the president has been shot. Again, I was a Republican. My family was Republican, but I do so vividly remember the Kennedy-Nixon debate. It was such a big deal. And so Kennedy was on our radar, even though we weren't necessarily big supporters. But many of my friends were Catholic, and they too had this very special spot in their lives for the Kennedys. So I just remember that we went to our next class, and the principal or the teachers had all heard, and they started sharing with us that the president had been shot. And, we kind of didn't get it either. We didn't realize what the impact of all this was. My next memory of it, and the reason why you said it, I asked what days, because this flashback came to me that I remembered. There was the big question, was there going to be the high school football game that night? And there wasn't. It was immediately canceled, and that was in Texas, in Dallas. Do not have Friday night football was a big deal. There was something major going on if that happened. And then I remember Sunday morning, and I don't really remember too much about Saturday what happened, but I remember Sunday morning we got up and we went to church, and we'd come home, and I turned on the TV back in my parents' bedroom, and I'm sitting there watching it, and all of a sudden I yelled to my parents, "Oh my God, I've just watched a man being shot on TV." In live, it wasn't the replay. It was the actual moment that it happened. And just the whole thing, you look back and you think back, and we were just talking amongst our group that you compare it to 9/11, exactly, and that's what you all probably, if you all can remember, because you were pretty young back then, and I know the elementary school kids don't remember it, but it's just one of those things that are, embedded in your memory, and you'll take with you, and it will make a difference in how you feel about things the rest of your life.
Thank you very much.
That's a good example, a very good example of what television has done to our society, because this event was the first time that everybody in the country could share a moment together. Granted, radio was around earlier, of course, but it's different when you're seeing things rather than just hearing them. And you know, everybody was on the phone constantly. The phone lines into and out of Washington were so overloaded they were jammed for a while. And it was an amazing time. And of course, we've seen so much since then. We've seen so many terrible moments in history. But this was the first time that we'd seen something really important. And even though none of the TV coverage included any actual footage of the assassination, so much of the aftermath was seen that you could really feel like you really understood what was going on. Even, you know, if you'd never even been to Dallas or never even been to Texas, you could go right there in your living room. This was a new experience for most people.
The assassination certainly impacted people all around the world, and people responded in their own ways. Our collections are full of examples of poetry and song and artwork that people created in response to the assassination. And we just had an event last night with Stephen King, who's just written a new book, 11/22/63, in which it's sort of his own response to the assassination. It's a time travel novel about what might have happened if Kennedy hadn't been killed in Dallas. And it got us thinking, as we were preparing for this program, about the unique ways that people respond to the Kennedy assassination, and sometimes the odd ways in which they respond to it. And we're going to see one of the odd examples now. Do you want to introduce this clip?
I will. You remind me of the name of the actual institution?
It's the Southwestern Historical Wax Museum.
Oh, yeah.
Oh. I spent many years working at the local NBC station, Channel 5 here, and one of my responsibilities was overseeing the news film library. Unlike the other stations, Channel 5 kept everything from their newscast when they signed on in 1948. And one of the pieces of film I found, which by the way is not yet in our permanent collection, but we've had ongoing discussions with them, and I know that eventually it'll happen. But one was this news story in 1965. I don't have the exact date, but the Wax Museum in Grand Prairie had been open a year or two, I think, and they decided to do an exhibit about the assassination. You know, when tourists come to town, they want to know about it, and there was no place to go. There was no sixth-floor museum. There was a museum that opened across the street years later, but they weren't open then. So this is 1965, and Stephen has actually studied a lot of this and has some more information about this exhibit.
Yeah, it's a short clip, so I want to go ahead and play it now. At this time, the Wax Museum was actually still at Fair Park. Those of you longtime Dallas residents might remember that the Wax Museum actually opened in 1963 for the 1963 State Fair of Texas. And a series of Kennedy displays were added between 1965 and 1966. And the one display we're going to look at today is, as Gary mentioned, from 1965, and it's when they unveiled their figure of Lee Harvey Oswald. And this figure was at the Wax Museum starting in '65, and in 1972 the Wax Museum moved to its familiar location in Grand Prairie, Texas. But unfortunately, if you go there today, it's now called the Palace of Wax. You will not see this figure of Oswald, not because it was controversial. In fact, there were never any complaints about this figure at all, if you can believe that, even though it was unveiled just 2 years after Kennedy was shot. The museum and all of the wax figures except for one burned down in September of 1988, and it was completely rebuilt and all new figures were brought in, and there is no Lee Harvey Oswald figure. But that's a unique example of the impact that the assassinations had on popular culture. And as Sharon mentioned, our program in December is going to be a look at the Kennedys and pop culture, and we're going to bring out some very unique artifacts, dolls, plates, tapestries, things like that, people and how they responded to the assassination. I want to close out with one more oral history clip and a very poignant example of how people responded to the assassination. We're going to hear from a local folk singer named Lou Mitchell, who performed at a lot of venues during the 1960s. And the weekend of the assassination, she wrote a song about her experiences seeing the Kennedy motorcade, but she never performed it. And 45 years later, when I sat down with her to do an oral history, she agreed to get out her guitar and for the first time ever perform this little ballad. So You're going to be hearing Lou Mitchell, and she's going to be singing the song that she wrote the weekend of the Kennedy assassination.
This evening in Dallas, I quietly ponder about a young man cut down in his prime. He came to our city one day in November. Little he knew that he came for to die. I saw him just once as he slowly passed by me. The joy in my heart was too great to deny. A shot rang out in the afternoon sunlight. Oh, John Kennedy, why did you die? But it takes more than guns to kill a man's spirit. It takes more than hatred for his memory to die. The torch of his greatness will light the world over. Oh, John Kennedy, why did you die? This evening in Dallas, I quietly ponder about a young man cut down in his prime. He came to our city one day in November. Little he knew that he came for to die. Okay? Yeah. And no one ever heard it except you and me.
And now all of you have heard it. Wonderful examples of the scope of our oral history project. And again, I encourage any of you, if you have memories of the assassination, especially if you'd rather not share them in a venue like this, please sign the book, leave your contact information, and we can do a one-on-one interview so that your story will be preserved in our collection. As we close out today's program, I want to ask some of the young folks in the audience if they would like to volunteer. Impressions of President Kennedy now that you've seen the museum, maybe you've seen documentaries about the assassination. If you'd like to share what it's like to be at the site of this historic event and maybe what President Kennedy means to you. Earlier this year, we expanded the oral history project to include what we call non-rememberers, and we began by looking at the 50th anniversary of the Peace Corps and inviting a wide variety of Peace Corps volunteers right up to the present day to share their memories. And it's really remarkable how similar folks' experiences are. Earlier we were talking about 9/11 and other tragic events in our history, and these cultural touchstones remain with us. I know for me, I was in the first grade when the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded, and that is, in many ways, my Kennedy assassination. Peter Jennings on ABC was my Walter Cronkite. And I know for folks born in the 90s, of course, the Oklahoma City bombing in 95 and September 11th, 2001. These are moments that stay with us throughout our lives, and the Kennedy assassination is certainly one of those touchstones. So would any of our young audience members like to share a little bit about what President Kennedy means to you, or maybe what event in your own lifetime reminds you of the photographs and footage you see at the museum when you visit today? Please don't be shy. No one?
No? Oh, you'll make us sad.
Yes.
All right.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and, is there anyone else, any rememberers in the audience that we haven't gotten to that would like to share their stories before we wrap up today's program? No? I think we've exhausted all the stories we're going to get today. We do want to remind you, as Sharon mentioned, we do have the museum. The next program is the 19th, just a couple days before the 48th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination. Filmmaker Roger Sherman will be premiering his short documentary on Richard Stolley, the Los Angeles bureau chief for Life magazine, who purchased the rights to the Zapruder film. And Mr. Stolley will also be here, and there'll be a Q&A after the screening. So if you have a chance to come back and visit us then, it'll be right here in this space at 2 o'clock on Saturday the 19th of November. And again, one more reminder, you're welcome to either contact me directly or sign the book at the back. And please fill out the evaluation forms you found in your chair. They help us as we plan future programming here at the Sixth Floor Museum. So on behalf of myself and Gary, we want to thank you very much for participating in our program.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.